Okay, so in this blog, I'm going to talk about a couple of lessons that we had had, a couple of rehearsals that we'd had, mainly because we couldn't be as productive as we ever wanted to be recently, because we've not had a full cast yet at all. So it's basically been about juggling what we had to do it to the best of the ability of our cast and of us as directors to be able to get what we want out of them, and then adding in things like props, the ideas of costume that we started to play about with, and putting it to the set as soon as we could so that our cast were familiar with what to do around the set and how to interact with the actual props to practice with. So, start off with, I'll basically talk about the last two rehearsals we've done. So to start off with, I'll talk about the first rehearsal we did. In this rehearsal, we didn't have a full cast again, but we looked at the piece as a whole. We'd now figured out Jan and Mark's sections, most of Leah's monologue, and Richard's monologue. Richard wasn't there for this this session, so we couldn't figure out what to do with his monologue better, so we had to focus on the group bits more, but most other people were there that were able to come. So we first of all needed to look at the suite section with the starburst between the interaction between Phil and Leah, and it shows off the effects of the argument they just had in the big scene, and she walks out on him, and it's kind of powerful in terms of showing her character change, especially when we watch the whole thing, the whole play all together. So in terms of that, we needed to look at that, and we figured it all out and blocked it all out and did it, and then we started to do some full runs ish, obviously with people standing in, people talking. We didn't have our mark because James had to go back to his other rehearsal group, so it was basically about doing what we could in this hour, these 2 hours. So we started off by looking at this interaction scene. Obviously it was really important to get the interaction between the two of them. We wanted Romario as Phil to take his time to open the suite, so it gives off this effect of awkwardness between the two. The fact that Phil is not used to Leah being so quiet, and that Leah is obviously making it really uncomfortable. In the stage directions, Leah is in tears, and so Vicky really struggled with trying to get that to that emotional level. So we tried to play about with her breathing, with her just having this silence. It would work better if it was more elevated, so we're trying to figure out how we can get that same intensity without her having physical tears, because often you don't need that. It's more about the tension between the two characters. So we thought about Romario slowly opening the suite and then giving one to Leah, to Phil giving one to Leah. We found that it was difficult to actually open the suite sometimes, so we thought that since Romario's Phil could do it, he could do it, open it, give it to Leah, so that she didn't have to open it herself, so that it provided more ability for her to just spit it out quicker and run off. We mainly just tried to talk to them about the emotions their characters would be feeling, to see whether they understood that and to see whether that came across in what they showed. And I think so far it came across, and it will work well after the big scene because it sort of leads into that. And as Phil's reaction when he shouts Leah, Leah, it's like this awkward, like, what have I done wrong kind of thing, which I think will hopefully work well. So we finished that, and then we started the run throughs. We looked at refining some bits of the scenes as best as we could, because people are still on scripts, so it's really difficult to get the same acting ability off people because people haven't learned their lines. So trying to get them to sort of use the depth of the space, getting them to walk forward when they had their lines and backwards, the more character interaction, more reacting when it comes to things like the monologues in the big scene, more reacting in terms of thinking about where the audience is, who they're talking to at this point. And we were just basically looking down to the nitty gritty of getting it so that it was fluid, and looking at certain aspects, characterization, and thinking, oh, we should change that. Like, we looked at elements of Leah's monologue and her use of, when she emphasizes certain words, we changed so that Phil was emphasized more, and that Phil had certain points in where he was reacting. So when she talks about the waffle, he looks at her and then watches her for a little bit and then just carries on when she says jam. So we tried to use the stage directions in the script, but we didn't want to totally just use the stage directions because we wanted it to be our own interpretation, and we felt like Phil is not so much of a a structured character and everything that he had to do. I think he's very much up to interpretation, and we wanted him to be a lot less responsive than it might suggest in the script. Furthermore, we looked at changing about like the potential structure of Richard's monologue, and we were going to look at trying to get him to move more, because even the amount of times that we've worked on it with Joe, he still has this ability to like lack energy and doesn't really like show as much enthusiasm that we really want Richard to show in this scene especially. So I think that we wanted to go through that with him, but obviously he wasn't there. So this wasn't as very productive rehearsal, but at least we got all of the scenes done and we managed to sort of get some sort of structure to it. So next we moved on to the next rehearsal. I'll talk about that rehearsal now because I'm going to put these two bits together. This was our first rehearsal with props. We brought in all of the props we thought we would need, some elements of costume like a hat, and we had some major directing changes. We started getting a bit harsh on the kids to try and figure out the key points at which they were going wrong and what we wanted them to change as directors. So that led us to our use of costume and ideas. So we brought in the waffle for Romario to actually practice with. So we had him reacting to Leah's monologue, but we hadn't actually had him use the waffle yet. And when we actually got him to use the waffle, we realised there were kind of a lot of complications that come with it. Even taking things out of the bag and like packing things away. It was really noisy and it distracted from the monologue. It was difficult to get into, and the comedic aspect can often be lost because it was just so much that he was trying to do. So I think that in terms of that, we needed to focus more on trying to figure out how he could actually use it to the timing. So we looked at him just basically doing it as it says in the script with a little bit of our input, and realised that we needed more structure to it. So I think after this rehearsal, I've gone away and I'm gonna next rehearsal that we have with him, we're gonna go through the certain points in which you should react, certain points in which you should take out a waffle, take out another waffle, put jam on it, put butter on it, the certain timings that he should do that to, so that has the best impact, we feel. So that's one thing that we realised when using the props. Also, the use of the other sweets, but we had the sweets last time, but we obviously used them again. Then the use of some other props, for example the plastic bag. Using the plastic bag is obviously a health and safety thing, so we have to be really careful to make sure that we practice this really well so that Romario knows how to do it onto John as Brian, so that he can still breathe but he can act as if he's not. So we initially had Brian falling to the ground, choking, and there to be a reaction from the others, because obviously as you're watching that, it's quite shocking, but the plastic bag wouldn't stay on and there were issues thinking about that. So we just had Phil as Romario as Phil, behind him and holding the bag onto his head from a higher height on the riser, so that it was like this sinister like idea, and him still holding it on so that hopefully he can still show the same idea of like panicking, but the reaction of that will show off like how sinister and dramatic it really is, instead of falling to the ground, because we couldn't tie it on with anything because that would be a health and safety issue. Talking more about the actions to do and the big scene, We did sort of like runs of it and like looked more at it, and then we picked pieces apart of it and said you need to improve this bit, and we reworked it. So in the transition to the big scene, initially thinking about trying to use noise, a blackout, so thinking about aspects in which we can get them on and off effectively. So we started thinking about transitions. Obviously we couldn't do this effectively because we didn't have any lighting or any noise to use, but it was an initial idea. We said with we needed to figure out volume of Phil because he wasn't loud enough, so we tried to get him to speak louder. Everybody needed to stay in character in the big scene, which is what they were struggling with. The timing of the giggling, we wanted the giggling of Brian in the big scene to slowly build up so that it kept annoying people around them because it was stressing everyone out and everyone was already stressed about the situation. So we tried to get the timing better, obviously because people didn't know their lines. John didn't know his lines, he had to use the script, so we didn't know when he needed to giggle, but we kept reminding him to sort of build it up from a certain line and making them do it again and again so that it was stuck in their heads. Reacting to monologues more, so they needed to react to Adam's monologue more. We got them all to like lean in almost, so that it created this sense of like them listening and them being intrigued, but then also, you know, this sense of like a group again, to sort of an understanding of what had happened to Adam, sorry. But we still need to improve on this in terms of them showing bigger reactions, because that's what fuels Adam's monologue, I feel. We practiced the slaps so many times. Stage slaps are difficult to do sometimes, and we made them do it many times to try and get the timing right, to try and get the aspect right, and kept saying to Leah that she would need to do a pause after the slap to have its best impact, which she's working on currently, and we were working on the slap. I think at the end we got it to a stage where we were happy with it, and the bigger the noise, the bigger the impact, and the reaction is all that it counts for. So mainly it was working with the props, so ways to get things out of the bag and the strangling. We found as well that when we tried to do runs with the props, to get things in and out of the bag was the thing that caused the most issue, because it took a long time and it was noisy and it looked unprofessional. So we're going to have to try and figure out a way of getting it so that it's effective. We'll obviously have less in the bag because we had all the props in the bag, and we're thinking of getting a little tie-up bag so that he can just put it all in there, tie it up quick and put it away, and try and get Romario to do this as quickly as possible, without losing dramatic effect. The use of earphones in the final scene, so we thought, as Richard is just sort of ranting along, we tried to go through his monologue again. He still doesn't know his lines, so again it's difficult to do the actions, but trying to get him to do the energy, going again and again and again until he got the right energy that we wanted. Of him putting in his earphones, having his earphones in to shut out from the world, no food that he's eating, which is unusual for Phil because usually he's always eating, so it shows this aspect of him changed. And now at the bottom, we had him at the bottom of the riser to show that he no longer feels that he has status or power and that he's totally out of it. So we had both earphones in. When Joe comes in as Richard, he takes one out, and then when Richard starts ranting about winds of fluff, clouds of fluff and things like that, and the dandelions, he puts them both back in, to show that he's not listening, he's not bothered. And I think that'll be a good way to show it, and it was really effective, I found. So hopefully if we just keep practicing the times at which he does that and the timing, it'll work well. We still needed more energy and passion, not only in voice but energy of body, in Richard, which we're still improving on, getting him to do it again and again. I'm trying to push him as much as we can so he gets that. I'd already mentioned the interrupting of Leah's monologue, but we made it so that it was way more effective in terms of Mark coming in first and then followed by Jan, and preventing Jan from just sort of walking into what was a really awkward, heartfelt moment that Leah was trying to project onto Phil. So yeah, and this is our last rehearsal before the Saturday rehearsal, which we have time to sort out costume and props more and do the lighting and the transitions and things like that. So hopefully on the Saturday rehearsal we'll have a full cast and we'll be able to go through all of it, and we'll be able to do full run throughs, and that's our aim. We've got more or less most things sorted. We just need to figure out those little situations that we had in our last rehearsal, and hopefully try and figure out more to do with costume. We looked at costume already, and I'm going to do a separate blog on what I think we could use as costume, and when we had a little talk with both me and Hannah together about it, as well as lighting and our intentions after we do our lighting. We'll do a blog together on what we decided together to do.